Welcome to Beyond the Numbers, the podcast where conversations about wealth go deeper. This isn't about flashy success or one-size-fits-all advice. It's about real people designing financial lives that align with who they are, what they value, and the legacies they're building. We bring together voices from business, finance, law, and leadership to talk about the moments that shape them and the strategies that sustain them. Here is your host, Chris Everett.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Beyond the Numbers, where money meets meaning and purpose. Today's guest has spent his career at the intersection of elite talent and exceptional outcomes. He's someone who understands that the most valuable asset in any technology company isn't the code, it's the people who write it. He's built engineering teams from the ground up, transforming technical vision into market-leading products. From the high-stakes world of mobile gaming at companies like Zynga to building new ventures from 0 to 1. He's learned that creating outstanding business results requires more than just technical expertise. It requires leadership that sees engineers not just as resources, but as creators, problem solvers, and innovators. His work spans multiple ventures, leading engineering at companies focused on mobile distribution and live operations, serving as a fractional leader, helping organizations build and retain world-class engineering talent, and contributing to thought leadership communities where technology executives navigate the rapidly evolving landscape of AI and business transformation. But what makes his perspective unique is his understanding that building great teams isn't just about hiring the right skill. It's about creating environments where talented people find meaning in their work, where technical excellence, aligns with business value, and where retention happens just naturally because people are engaged in something larger than themselves. So everyone, help me welcome John Szeder, Fractional Chief Technology Officer. John, welcome to Beyond the Numbers.
Hey there, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for that warm and exciting introduction. The way you describe it, I want to meet that guy.
Yeah, he's pretty cool, right? Pretty awesome. All right, well, let's start this way. You've had an interesting career path from Zynga, the global leader in interactive entertainment, through various ventures to where you're now at Seismic Studios, your own S-Corp. Can you walk us through the key inflection points in your career where you discovered what truly drives you? What made you transition from being in engineering teams to leading them, and then to focusing on building elite teams for other organizations?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can remember the exact moment when I discovered what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And it was probably about 10 minutes after I got into the Ultima Online beta in the late 90s. I was working at a wireless software company doing location-based services, building software solutions for doing real-time vehicle tracking for, large fleets. That's, fairly buzzwordy and very, B2B. And, playing one of my first online games when I was playing Ultima Online, I'm like, online social games are going to be the future. I don't want to do any more of this enterprise software build out craziness. I want to focus on consumer technology and building entertainment and, experiences for people that scale to millions of players. That would probably be one of the biggest ones for me to make a decision about where I wanted to focus and why I jumped in to join a company called Empath Interactive. Ironically, I joined in their enterprise sales group, not in their engineering group, which was also a transformative moment because it got me to see the full value stack. A lot of times there's like this real, engineering builds the products, hubris or elitism that some engineer, I was as guilty of that as anybody, to say, hey, I build all this stuff. I'm super cool and this is amazing. To understand that it's a team effort to get stuff into people's hands and shipping products and making everything successful. So I think that, that sort of 1-2 punch kind of put me on a very different track fairly early on in my career. I would say that the transition from being in engineering teams to leading them happened shortly afterwards. And there's this notion in software development of what's called a 10x engineer, who's usually a person who can do orders of magnitude more work than the average engineer. You don't measure a good engineer by saying he's 15% better or 3 times better. It's usually they are 10 to 1,000 times better because of the way that they think about problems differently. And what I discovered is that while, you can be a very talented engineer and you can plow through problems very quickly, at the same time, if you don't think about the soft skills and the way that you're interacting with the rest of the team around you, you could be a massive professional train wreck. I would have people leaving meetings in tears early on in my career. And somewhere along the way, I just realized, I can't just plow my way through my entire career successfully here. I've got to make some changes in the way that I do things and the way I interact with people.
Good for you, right? That's awesome. So, in your experience at Zynga and beyond, though, you've seen both the explosive growth phase and the operational excellence phase of technology companies. What did those experiences teach you about relationship between business outcomes and also the quality of the engineering organization?
That's a great question. What I really learned is that everybody's good at something, and sometimes the thing that you need to do might not be the thing that you're very good at, right? This is especially true in software publishers in the entertainment space and the notion of a live operation service these days. When I was at Zynga, I was on Zynga Poker, which is a $200 million a year product. And it was in its 10th year of existence or so. And that's a long time for a game to be up and running and operating. And when you think about that, there are people who build games because they want to build new experiences and they specialize in design and creating cool loops in that creative part. Those are the wrong people to have running a live operations business. So you really have to have a distinction between, I'm operating this business and I'm doing this and I'm making these changes and I'm running this as a service versus I'm creating something new and something excellent. One of the things that I do with a friend of mine is we purchase old games from developers who want to build a new game, right? And they're no longer doing a great job of managing their franchise. It's kind of stabilized or flatlined, maybe slightly decreasing. We're particular about what we look at. But the people who have built that game, they're the wrong people to run it, and they know that. And so we help them get an exit from that and just buy the asset, leaving them free to go off and get into the wilderness and build something new and exciting.
Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah. So you describe yourself, though, as a 0 to 1 expert. What does that mean to you? And why is building something from nothing such a different challenge than scaling something that already exists?
Yeah, it's usually what I've told people is, building a product is hard, right? And building a team is hard and building a company is hard. And a lot of times the 0 to 1 person is somebody who's doing all three of those things at the same time. You're sitting there in a room and you have an idea, or you're working with somebody who's an idea. Maybe you have a little bit of funding. Maybe you just have some idle cycles where you want to build something and see where it goes and you think you understand product market fit. But starting with absolutely nothing and building something out of that is a really different skill set from taking something and iterating on it. And I've seen people who are good at both, right? You have somebody whose focus is, okay, I'm going to start with a clean slate and I'm going to do this thing. And then there's also people I've worked with where you can ask them to write you a proposal and 3 weeks later you'll have nothing. But if you give them a draft proposal, they'll beat it into shape in 5 minutes, right? It's like, hey, some people will be able to sculpt it from clay, from the lump of clay to, other people, you have to give it at least a humanoid figure and say, okay, make it a better looking, humanoid figure.
So it's really important for you to understand what someone's expertise is, what their skill level is. So you build elite teams. Let's talk about what elite means to you when it comes to engineering teams. So in your view, what separates an elite engineering team from just merely a good one? I suppose, and even more importantly, if I could interject, what are the financial and the business implications of that distinction?
The business implications are pretty clear because you get to better outcomes by having an elite team. And
Okay.
one of the things I've noticed is when I've joined an organization, one of the first things that happened to me just about everywhere I've taken an executive engineering leadership role is they slapped a hiring freeze on me very quickly. And what usually happens is I join a company and I fill all the available roles at a speed that they've never seen before. And employee churn drops to nearly zero. In some cases, it's like absolute zero. In a number of cases, a few times I've been at startups where a few people are like, hey, I want to go to a different job because I have a green card and I want something with more security. I get that, or we're building this stuff on the Microsoft stack and I want to go into open source. I'm still in touch with those two guys today that, left companies, but I can remember the two people that were regrettable departures over a 30-year window, and they're more the exception than the rule, right? An elite team is a team that ships software together, generally is on time, generally is under budget, and they generally understand the problem and they generally stick together. Those are, sort of a lot of things that stack on top of each other. But if you look at a handful of people that are connected to me on LinkedIn, there are people I've worked with at 3 or 4 different companies together. I got some kind of internal personal record with Zynga HR when I joined the company for being the most number of individual referrals within a year, because I recommended over a dozen people to come and join the company, and there were very clear roles for all of them. So being able to have that troop of people that you can bring in and make them successful in an organization, as well as, adding people to that network over time, right? And coming up with tools and processes to say, this is how hiring has changed. In fact, on Friday, I'm giving a presentation, a webinar on how hiring is different in the age of AI, because it's turned upside down. Once upon a time, you would struggle to get 50 good resumes to find a couple of candidates to interview. When you open a job listing today, you generally get like 1,000 resumes, and you have to sift through that to find the people that are worth interviewing and eventually hiring.
So I'd imagine when you first started building the teams, it was almost luck of the draw depending upon what you had. But what I'm hearing is that over time, you really develop these relationships and can plug
Yes.
and play, more or less.
Yep.
That's good. So you work with companies on building and retaining elite talent. In today's competitive market, the cost of losing a senior engineer is probably astronomical, right? Not just salary and recruiting costs, but loss in institutional knowledge, momentum. So how do you help an organization think about retention, not necessarily as an HR problem, but as a business value problem?
Most of the places where I work in a leadership role, they don't think about retention because it's not a problem, right? I have this weird love-hate relationship with HR because I come in and I change all the rules on team building. I join a company and I come in and say, hey, we're a live operations business. We are so busy recovering from the weekend on Monday, trying to figure out what went wrong or what we need to fix, that we are never going to interview anybody on Monday. And they freak out because suddenly they're like, oh my gosh, we're going to have 4/5 the number of people who are going to come through the hiring pipeline. But the people that we do hire, they're going to have a quality interview because we're not, stuck firefighting or in long meetings, and the people who need to interview them are not available, so that we could have a better, more quality experience, right? So when I build a lot of teams for people, what I usually do is I sit down and say, okay, what is it that this person wants out of their career? I don't look at people for the job in front of me. You could be a hiring manager who is, you could be best fit or best athlete is the way I describe it. I'm a best athlete hiring manager. I'm not a best fit hiring manager. A best fit hiring manager is like somebody who works as a bank teller. Did they enter the PIN? Do they have the card? Did they give me their driver's license? Oh, I can give them the money. They just go through a checklist.
That's
no
not an
thinking
elite
involved,
team
right?
person, right?
It is not an elite team person. Well, maybe, I don't know. It's not me, that's for certain. But what I do is I take a look and I say, okay, this person, I've looked at what they were before, the job that they've had. I've looked at their career arc based on what they've got in their resume. And then I ask people, the first question I ask you is, where do you want to be in 5 years' time? If I can't help you get to where you want to be in 5 years' time, in 3 years, I probably don't want to hire you.
That's smart. Real smart. Yeah. So twisting a little, many financial advisors, including me, help clients think about their most important asset, their human capital, their earning potential. It's why people buy life insurance, disability insurance, why people do retirement planning. From your perspective, leading those engineering teams, how should technical professionals think about their own career as a financial asset? I mean, you just kind of touched on where you're going, but how should they be really valuing themselves as a financial asset? And what decisions maximize that long-term value versus the short-term compensation? Do you find yourself in those conversations?
All the time. And, I always tell people, one of the things I do with all the teams that I have is I have this lecture that I give people about our one-on-one. If you have a boss who uses a one-on-one correctly, that is one of the things that will help you shape your career and think about it as, like you said, a financial asset. And I always ask people, it's like, where are you going? What are you thinking about? And I tell people, hey, this is your meeting. This is not my meeting. You can move it. You can cancel it. If you had this on the calendar for 30 minutes and you said you wanted to read me some poetry, I will listen to your poetry and give you an honest opinion, because this is your meeting. I don't want a status update. I don't want to hear about the project. I don't want to hear about risks. I want you to ask me questions about your career or what we're doing right now and the larger, landscape of technology. I don't want this to be a tactical meeting. Schedule that status meeting if you need to have it. This is your one-on-one time. And a lot of that is sitting down and saying, what are you doing with your career right now that is going to help you get a promotion or help you evaluate where you want to be down the road. There are some people who will say, I want to be a CTO, or I want to be a manager, I want to be a VP of engineering, or I want to go into product management, right? So we sit down and we sit down and discuss, what are the projects that you can do right now that will help you prepare for that? Or what are the pieces that you need to get there from here? What are the things you need to work on? And we do a gap analysis, right? And sit down and go, this is what's missing and this is what you need to do next.
No wonder your funnel is so full of elite talent that stays with you long term. You develop relationship. That's awesome. So one of the themes of this podcast is finding meaning and purpose in our financial and career decisions. So when you're building an engineering culture, how do you create an environment where talented people find genuine meaning in their work, not just competitive compensation? And I think it has a lot to do with the last piece of the conversation we just had. Is there more to say about that?
It's I do a handful of things that I think are important. When I was a VP of engineering in 2011, they had someone come in to be an executive coach for one of the members on my team who needed to understand that they were never going to be a successful executive. And in order to make that stick better with them, they basically enrolled him, his three peers, and myself in the executive coaching. So this lady, Sally Wilder, she's a wonderful executive coach, gave us this workbook. We did all these assessments. We had all these things that we did. And, one of the things that was in my 360 review from the CEO is one of John's problems as a VP of engineering is that he lacks gravitas. He doesn't bring enough seriousness to the role. He's always joking around, and I can never tell when he's pulling my leg or saying something secret. But that's actually one of my superpowers. Work can be fun. You can have an engaging conversation with people and you can bring some silliness to it and some light banter. A lot of times when we have meetings, we now have a thing where we start a meeting, and if it's a very big meeting with a lot of people, the first 5 minutes while we wait for people to trickle in, we declare it banter time. We ask, who is the quorum keeper for the organization? Do we have quorum? And we assign silly roles to people. And then we sit down and say, hey, you're about to start the meeting. We got 2 minutes of banter left. Let's finish our conversation about whatever it was that we were talking about. But, we inject these little moments of joy into the conversation and, fill up the Slack channel with silly emojis and, talk about making fetch happen from Mean Girls. It blows people's mind when the VP of engineering, will sit there in a meeting and go, hey, that's totally fetch. People will just look at me weird when I say that. It's like, oh my gosh, this guy just quoted a funny, culturally relevant movie from the 90s, right?
And yet people can come into that meeting more relaxed, more authentic, and kind of really ready to engage.
Yep,
just from
100%.
that, right? Isn't that? Yep. Okay. So you work with Technology Executives Club and in thought leadership space, which makes sense to me. As AI transforms the technology landscape, how are you seeing engineering leaders rethink what creates value? What does it mean to lead an exceptional engineering effort when tools and possibilities are just changing so rapidly?
Yeah, the good news there is that, a lot of engineers are very introverted, and a lot of them sort of don't get into organizations like that, or they don't spend time as a group. I'm blessed with a number of people that I work with, both, folks in the Technology Executives Club and 3 different sort of CTO support groups and little friend circles that I have where we talk about these things. And the deep truth is the expertise that I have in building out AI solutions right now for people, it's a mix of sort of like a joint R&D group with 3 or 4 other engineering thought leaders, some of whom are doing similar kinds of experimentation, playing around with these tools and coming up with ideas. We bounce it off each other, we try things, and we share pretty readily. And so, the fact that we have that little group of people that talk very readily about these tools, and we chat on LinkedIn, we send each other Discord messages, we're able to get insights as to what trends are happening, with 3 times the visibility radius or 4 times the visibility radius of just one person, because we're sharing, right? And that helps us, stay abreast of the curve. And, someone can try an experiment and say, holy cow, don't do this. This wound up going really bad, and here's why. And it's not just the successes in that, it's also discussing the failures and saying, here's what to avoid, or here's something that broke. And, sitting down and sharing those things, I think is very excellent.
I think you're right. I mean, years ago, I was designing portfolios and I was really in a vacuum. What I didn't know in 2000, 2001 and 2, when the markets were just like dropping like flies, was that my portfolios rebounded faster than many of my peers, but I was living in a vacuum and I didn't realize it. So I think what you just said was very powerful. So let's get tactical for a minute. So you're brought in to help an organization build or transform their engineering team. What are the first things you assess? Like, are you looking for warning signs that the company's about to lose their best people? Are there leading indicators of a healthy, high performing team? How do you approach that?
I usually don't get called in to assess healthy, high performing teams. By the
Just the
time
ones that
somebody
are a
calls me
mess.
on the phone, it's a fractional executive of last resort.
Okay.
If you need my help, you really need help. I have a lot of things where from the time I pick up to the phone to the time the contract has been signed has been 8 hours, right? It's like, listen, I'm available now. I can jump in. I understand your problem. And, it's, you take a look at the team dynamic, you take a look at the velocity, and you ask, what's not working here? And you sit down and you just look for the patterns. And, I graduated from University of Waterloo in 1996. So I'm celebrating 30 years of doing this kind of work, mostly in startups, right? And so the fun there is that, there are not that many new patterns that I see anymore for what the problems are. I usually come into an organization and I've got a playbook amongst a dozen things that I've done in the past. And people are kind of funny because they're like, you seem very calm right now. And I'm like, this is on a scale of 1 to 10, this is about a 0.06 for, stress compared to other stuff I've seen. Right. And people are fascinated by that. But it's just, we'll get through these problems. The thing that you're describing or the thing that we're fixing here, it's probably not even going to hit a month of pain or less than $1 million of damage. And sometimes we've had problems that it's like literally $100,000 an hour of economic impact to the business every hour that it's down, and trying to figure out how to put it back up. Right. That's what real stress looks like.
Okay, so really what I'm hearing is that it doesn't really matter what business you're in. Experience is a power tool. I
It
think
really
about
is.
my own
Yeah.
stuff, your stuff. Yeah. So what have you learned about yourself? Like, what do you value by working in this portfolio career model rather than being all in at one company? How does it change your relationship to both money and meaning?
Boy, my relationship with money has been unusual, right? Startups tell you a story, and there's a certain amount of fiction to the meritocracy of startups. And I think I learned that about 15 years too late. The general startup, if you look at it and the general relationships that people have with their investors, there's always a money trail that leads to an investment path. Either it's a former executive that he was, somebody was on my sales team, helped me do a $10 million deal at Salesforce so I could invest in him. I call it house money is the notion that I use to describe it. And there's a subset of entrepreneurs and people who come in who don't have, a Stanford degree is worth, $10 million Series A. Just going to Stanford is probably worth similar to that. And if you've never been to Stanford or you've never worked at Microsoft and you're just out there as a person with big ideas, people don't know what to price you as an entrepreneur, right? So I went out probably for about 5 years pitching for investment without realizing that I pretty much looked like an entertaining clown to the investment community because there were so many things that I was missing. A lot of people took those pitches because they realized I was a person of phenomenal engineering talent and they were trying to matchmake me with other CEOs and people to join their businesses. I misinterpreted a lot of those signals, but also I found that the handful of conversations that went someplace, I didn't get the premium value for the equity I was looking for. Like a really sharp CEO would be like, I can give you 5% of the company as we raise money together. I'm like, 5? How about 40, right? And we had such a significant mismatch for we're both going to be spending the same time in the space. We're going to be working together. I don't know why you think you should have the lion's share of the equity. If that's what they taught you at your MBA program or whatever it is that you learned that at, that's great, but you're not going to attract A-star talent. And then a number of years later, I'll see where that company went and it didn't go very far, or maybe it did. And I'll go, okay, there, but for the grace of God, go. No regrets about it. But at the same time, it's very clear that, maybe it's, an inflated sense of self-worth has saved me from a couple of train wrecks, but also may have cost me a few opportunities.
Well, and I think too, when you create more of a win-win scenario for both parties, it usually comes out better anyway, you know.
That's true. Mm-hmm.
So as we start to close a little bit, I'd love to hear your perspective on this. If a talented engineer or an engineering leader is listening to this convo and thinking about the next chapter of their career, what's one piece of advice, aside from the last one you just gave,
Yeah.
that you'd give them about aligning their technical skills with both financial success and personal fulfillment?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's like, first of all, I wish that I would have been smarter about putting money away earlier in my career. I was all in on the startup space. And early on in my business, I always had a 10% slush fund from whatever business or company I had to do experiments. And I've had some early successes with that, but I don't think I've had a significant success with one of my R&D slush fund projects since 2011. That's a long time to say, hey, I'm going to take this money and put it to work. I'm creating jobs. I'm learning stuff from people. I'm putting products into the marketplace and I'm experimenting. Wouldn't say I'm getting an impressive ROI on that money, right? If I would have taken that 10% and put it into an investment portfolio, I'd probably be a lot better off. I have 6 kids, right? A couple of them are in college, and that is very expensive, let alone living in California, right?
This I
So
know.
sit down and think about that, right? That's what I would tell some people to think about, especially early on in your career. I spent some time working with a friend of mine who also, my parents were immigrants. My father was in the Hungarian Revolution. My mom left Austria to move to North America. And, I have another friend who was on one of my engineering teams. And I told him, it's like, go buy a stock a day, right? Set aside some money, talk it over with your wife, start playing around with it. And we spent some time sharing, how that's been looking. And, for me, I bought a couple of shares of NVIDIA, and that's been a nice thing that started making my portfolio move a little bit. But his parents are always like, think about your money in one way and save it and whatever, but they don't teach you to put it to work for you, which is something a lot of people with very old school parents don't quite learn. And understanding that, I think, would probably be a big thing that I tell some people. I know that kind of dovetails nicely into the conversation here, but honestly, that is a really big one. And the real big piece of career advice that I give to a lot of people, which is something I do myself because I'm just coming off of a very difficult project that I spent a lot of weekends working on because it was related to live sports events where I had to be available during those to do some debugging. But I always tell people the best thing you could do for yourself is get uncomfortable. If you can make yourself
Good for
uncomfortable and do something outside of your wheelhouse and do something that's a little bit, I call it comfortably uncomfortable is the term that I use for it. And if you're willing to make yourself uncomfortable, then you're good to go. And that's something I bring into a lot of the mentoring I do for people. I'll mentor people and I'll help them work on some projects and I'll give them some homework and it's uncomfortable. And then when they don't do it, I'm like, well, I don't want to renew with you on the current terms. Your rates are going to go up if we want to keep this mentoring relationship going. And they're surprised. And they're like, why? And it's like, well, you're not listening to me, right? I've given you some uncomfortable homework. You chose not to do it. So I'm wasting my time. If I'm going to be wasting my time, I want to get paid more for it because, you have to do this work, right?
You said
and then people start doing their homework.
Oh, good. Because you threatened them with their pocketbook. You said a lot of things in there. And one of the things that struck me is, how you relate to money, right? It has an awful lot to do with how you were raised and whether or not your folks talked about it or not, gave you any financial intelligence or not. We deep dive into that stuff with our clients because it's just really important. Whether you're speaking it, John, or not, your kids are picking up what you're putting down. Let's just put it that way. So right. So it's important to take a look at that stuff. So I really want to thank you for joining me today, John. For our listeners who want to learn more about your work or connect with you, where can they find you?
I'm really active on LinkedIn, SZEDER. It's not that many of us out there. You can Google it, search it. I have a small blog where I talk about the things I've been running it for 4 years. It's been mostly self-therapy over the pain of being a technology entrepreneur and startup operator. And, beyond that, generally available via email. So
what's
happy
the
to
blog?
answer questions. It's mofactor.com, MOFACTOR. It's a company, my third startup. I just kept the website because I like the name, but it's basically just a place where I go and I spend time ranting about, consumer trends or things that are happening in the industry. I have a 49-inch monitor here, and across the bottom, I've got about a dozen Post-its, which is every once in a while I'll be in the middle of a conversation. I'll write down a little something and, put it onto a little Post-it note. Here's one of them, a Post-it note that says other people's bosses and, ratting people out. And I want to talk about the importance of if you have a problem with somebody at the company, don't go to their boss, go to your boss, right? Because if you go to somebody else's boss, it's going to get weaponized against them, which has happened to me once or twice in my career, but I didn't think about it at the time, right?
That's one of the reasons I like having a smaller company. So I have 2 clients that work for me. So they already got the culture before they came on board, but I gave them permission early on to just give me feedback. The gift that keeps giving, right? So as soon as we find something amazing that any of us is doing, we mention it. As soon as we find something stupid we're doing, we mention it. Or
Oh yeah.
anything that would really drive the company to a better end, we mention it. And sometimes we fight about it, but the fight is for our client. Isn't that interesting? So I love that I brought clients in who already understood that culture, and then we can take ourselves higher. So good convo, Joan. I like you. Look, for everyone listening today, remember the numbers on our financial statements tell only part of the story. The real value in our careers, our companies, our lives really comes from finding that intersection where your talent meets meaningful work and sustainable success, beyond the numbers. So please like and subscribe. Share this with other engineers and anyone who's looking to grow beyond the numbers. So I want to thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time where money meets meaning and purpose. Have a great day.
Beyond the Numbers podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.